For over 50 years, their friendship was the stuff of Hollywood legend. On screen, they were the charming outlaws who captivated the world. Off-screen, Robert Redford and Paul Newman shared a bond so deep it became as iconic as their films. But, for years, especially after Newman's passing, Redford chose his words carefully, letting the work they did together speak for itself. Now, at 89, he's reflecting on the pivotal moment that started it all, a moment that almost didn't happen, and forged a brotherhood unlike any other. So, what was the real story behind one of cinema's greatest friendships? Let's be honest, in the ruthless landscape of Hollywood, true friendships can be as fleeting as a box office hit. The whole industry is built on manufactured images, on-screen chemistry that dissolves the second the cameras stop, and rivalries that simmer just under the surface. Yet one bond seemed to defy all the odds. Paul Newman and Robert Redford, the names alone, are like two sides of the same golden coin of American cinema. When they exploded onto the screen in 1969's Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid, something just clicked. It wasn't only the witty script or their shared charisma. It was a sense of camaraderie that felt too real, too authentic to just be acting. Here were two of the most talented, famous men on the planet, not fighting for the spotlight, but sharing it, making each other shine brighter. They didn't just make a buddy film, they created the blueprint for it. The world saw them as Butch and Sundance, as Gondorf and Hooker. They were the rebels you wanted to have a beer with, the guys who always had each other's backs. And the stories that trickled out from the set, of elaborate pranks and endless laughter, only cemented that image. In the public eye, they were the ultimate friends. But a myth, no matter how great, is always a simplified version of the truth. The real story of their friendship was far more complex and, in many ways, more profound. It was a bond forged not in success, but in a moment of huge professional risk. And for Robert Redford, it all began with a single, career-defining act of grace from a man who had every reason to say no, a moment that would tie his life and legacy to Paul Newman's forever. Tatisen. The late 1960s, Hollywood was changing. The old studio system was falling apart, and a new generation was on the rise. At the very top of the old guard was Paul Newman. By 1968, he wasn't just a movie star. He was an institution. With hits like The Hustler and Cool Hand Luke, his name on a poster was a guarantee. And then there was Robert Redford. While handsome and clearly talented, he was still seen as a relative newcomer, known mostly for the light comedy Barefoot in the Park. He was a promising actor, but not yet a heavyweight, who could go toe-to-toe with a titan like Newman. That's when a brilliant script by William Goldman, originally called The Sundance Kid and Butch Cassidy, started making waves. The director, George Roy Hill, knew he had a hit on his hands, but the studio, 20th Century Fox, was firm. They needed two superstars of equal weight. Newman was their guy for one role. For the other, they wanted a huge name: Steve McQueen, Warren, Beatty, even Marlon Brando. Originally, Newman was supposed to play the quiet, intense Sundance Kid. But director George Roy Hill knew the real Paul, the off-screen prankster full of humor and wit, was much more like the talkative Butch Cassidy. Hill convinced Newman to switch roles, a move of pure genius. But that left the part of the Sundance Kid wide open. Redford read the script and felt an instant connection to Sundance. He told Hill that while he could play Butch, his heart was with the Sundance character. Hill agreed, seeing a rugged depth in Redford that went beyond his pretty boy image. The studio, however, said no. Absolutely not. They saw Redford as a lightweight and pushed Hill to cast a bigger star. But the director wouldn't back down. He fought them relentlessly, but the production stalled. The fate of the film came down to one person: Paul Newman. He was the star with all the power. He could have listened to the studio and demanded an actor of equal fame. Instead, he did something incredible. Newman, the icon, stood up for the newcomer. After meeting with Redford, Newman simply said, "Okay, let's go. I want to work with an actor." He saw a kindred spirit in Redford, a professional dedicated to the craft. He threw his star power behind the director's choice, telling the studio he wanted Redford as his Sundance. Without Newman's support, it never would have happened. It was an act of generosity and artistic integrity in a town where both are often in short supply. Redford has never forgotten it. Decades later, his gratitude is still clear. "He changed my life," Redford stated. "He agreed to have me in the movie that I shouldn't have been in. I always felt that I owed Paul for that." The studio finally gave in. Redford got the part. In a final, fitting move, the film's title was flipped to reflect Newman's star power. Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid. The stage was set, and the foundation of a 40-year brotherhood was laid. When filming began on Butch Cassidy, the legendary chemistry wasn't instant, it was built. On the surface, they were different. Newman was the established star, 11 years older, while Redford was the newcomer, eager to prove himself. But they quickly found common ground in their shared training in New York theater and live television. They were serious about the work, but it was between takes that the real friendship sparked. A dynamic emerged based on what Redford called irreverence, playing on the other's flaws for fun, one-upmanship, but always with an underlying affection. This playful rivalry became their thing. Newman, far from his cool on-screen image, was actually a chatty, nervous guy who was always biting his nails. He also loved to laugh, especially at his own terrible jokes. Redford said you'd forget how bad the joke was just because you'd get swept up in Newman's sheer joy. If Newman messed up a line, he'd enjoy the mistake more than anyone. Redford would look at him and say, "You're not fooling anybody. You've lost your line." And Newman would just roar with laughter. Their bond only deepened when they reunited 4 years later for The Sting. By then, their friendship felt so natural that, as Redford said, the film just sort of fell into place. The on-set teasing continued. Redford had a habit of being late, which Newman constantly ribbed him about, while Redford would roll his eyes at Newman's over-the-top search for acting motivation. It was this good-natured friction that made their on-screen banter feel so real. After Butch Cassidy, Redford even moved to Connecticut, ending up just a mile from Newman's home. Their friendship became deeply personal. Their families grew close, with Newman's kids reportedly calling Redford Uncle Bobby. They also discovered a shared love for auto racing. Redford got Newman hooked after he took a spin in Redford's Porsche. Of course, this hobby became the arena for their most legendary pranks. For Newman's 50th birthday, Redford got sick of hearing him brag about his racing skills. So, he found a completely wrecked Porsche at a junkyard, had it gift-wrapped, and delivered it to Newman's doorstep. Newman's revenge was a masterpiece. He never said a word. Instead, he had the wreckage crushed into a dense, twisted cube of metal. A short time later, this massive, ugly sculpture was delivered to the living room of Redford's rental house, where it promptly dented the floor. Not to be outdone, Redford then had the metal cube turned into an even uglier piece of garden art and dropped it in Newman's pristine garden. The best part? As Redford later revealed, there was an unspoken rule. To this day, neither one of us has ever mentioned it. This dynamic was their way of keeping each other humble. If you're in a position of being viewed iconically, you'd better have a mechanism to take yourself down to keep the balance, Redford explained. I think we did that for each other. But beneath all the pranks lay a deep, unspoken current of support. They showed up for each other in ways the public rarely saw. Redford saw Newman as a brother, someone whose integrity was a guiding star. Friendship was very important to him, and being able to be a real person was very important to him, Redford said. Their brotherhood was built on shared values and a shared discomfort with the phoniness of Hollywood. But no friendship, especially one lived in the Hollywood spotlight, is without its rough patches. While their bond was genuine, professional pressures and different work styles sometimes created friction. A key source of tension came from their different approaches on set. Paul Newman was a stickler for punctuality. Redford, not so much. In his posthumously released memoir, Newman was frank about his frustration, stating, "You can't depend on Redford. You're never sure he's going to be there. That's simply discourteous." Newman's daughter, Clea, clarified that it wasn't personal dislike, but a clash of work ethics between her hard-working father and the more free spirit, Redford. After the massive success of The Sting, everyone expected a third film. It seemed like a no-brainer. But it never happened. For years, people wondered if they'd had a falling out. The truth was much simpler: artistic integrity. They, along with director George Roy Hill, spent over a decade searching for the right script. They knew they'd created magic twice and refused to churn out a subpar film just for a paycheck. "We haven't been able to find one that we liked enough for the three of us to be in it together," Newman once said. The closest they came was years later, with a film adaptation of Bill Bryson's memoir, A Walk in the Woods. It seemed like the perfect final chapter for their on-screen partnership. Redford brought the project to Newman, but by then, time had caught up to them. Newman, facing health challenges, felt he couldn't handle the physical demands of the role and gracefully bowed out. The film was eventually made in 2015, with Nick Nolte in the part meant for Newman. As the years passed, their paths diverged. Redford focused on directing and building the Sundance Institute, while Newman dedicated himself to philanthropy and racing, but the friendship held firm. When Paul Newman passed away in 2008, Robert Redford didn't rush to join the public chorus of tributes. He remained quiet for a couple of days. It wasn't indifference, it was respect. Their bond was private, and he wasn't about to perform his grief for the cameras. When he finally released a statement, it was short, poetic, and gut-wrenching in its simplicity. "There is a point where feelings go beyond words. I have lost a real friend. My life and this country is better for his being in it." In that moment of loss, any past frustrations melted away, leaving only the core truth. He had lost a brother. His silence wasn't an absence of feeling. It was proof of its depth. The true measure of their bond isn't just in the films they made, but in the incredible legacies they built separately, but in parallel. Both men reached the top of Hollywood, and then made a conscious choice to use their fame for something bigger. They shared a quiet belief that if you're lucky enough to have success, you have a duty to give something back. For Paul Newman, it all started as a joke in 1982 when he and a friend bottled their homemade salad dressing as gifts. The demand exploded, and Newman's Own was born. From day one, Newman made a revolutionary promise: 100% of the profits would go to charity. What started with salad dressing grew into a food empire, and the Newman's Own Foundation became a philanthropic powerhouse. As of 2025, the foundation has donated over $600 million to good causes, with a special focus on camps for children with serious illnesses. Around the same time, Robert Redford was starting his own legacy project. Fed up with the Hollywood machine, he wanted to create a haven for independent filmmakers. In 1981, on land he owned in Utah, he founded the Sundance Institute, named for the very role that made him a star. It was a workshop where new voices could be mentored and develop their craft away from studio pressure. What started as a small gathering has grown into the most important platform for independent film in the world. The Sundance Film Festival has launched the careers of countless directors, championing the kinds of personal, diverse, and challenging stories the big studios ignored. Newman's Own and the Sundance Institute are two sides of the same coin. Both were born from a desire to create something meaningful beyond their own careers. Both reflect a deep integrity and a rejection of the shallow side of fame. Their friendship in later years was held together by this shared mission. They didn't see each other all the time, but they supported each other's work, showing up for one another's causes. Their shared values were the true foundation of their bond. In the end, the story of Robert Redford and Paul Newman is more than a Hollywood tale. It's a story about a friendship built on respect, playful rivalry, and profound unspoken support. For decades, the world saw the easy chemistry and the legendary pranks. But as Redford reflects in his later years, the real magic was in the quiet moments. Newman's unwavering support for a young actor, changing the course of his life. It lived in the unspoken rule that a good prank was never to be acknowledged, a secret language between friends. And it was felt most deeply in the respectful silence that followed Newman's death, a silence that said more than any eulogy ever could. They showed that two titans could share the spotlight, not as rivals, but as partners who made each other better. Their on-screen magic wasn't a trick, it was a reflection of genuine off-screen admiration. Today, their legacy lives on not just in their classic films, but in the world they changed for the better. Through Newman's Own and the Sundance Institute, they turned their success into a force for good. They didn't just play heroes on screen. They lived lives of quiet heroism, proving that true star power lies in generosity and integrity. When Robert Redford speaks of Paul Newman now, it's with a reverence and affection that time hasn't touched. He remembers not just the movie star, but the humble, funny, and deeply loyal man he called his friend and his brother. Theirs was a friendship that didn't just define an era of Hollywood, it defined their lives. And in a world of fleeting connections, the story of their authentic brotherhood remains one of the greatest Hollywood has ever told. If you enjoyed this look into one of Hollywood's most iconic friendships, don't forget to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and hit the notification bell for more deep dives into the stories that shaped cinema. Now we want to hear from you. What is your favorite Robert Redford and Paul Newman movie? Let us know in the comments below.